Thank you for joining us. This is our fifth webinar. This one is slightly different than the other ones that we've done in that it's just half an hour. We're going to try to do this a little bit more quickly than some of our other ones. It's not so much that we're going to go faster. We've got a little bit of a simpler subject matter this time. We're going to go through introductions, talk about Bespoken. We do want to talk a little bit about testing and monitoring in general, and why we think it's important and how to do it. And then we're really going to focus on the monitoring, which I also refer to as the continuous testing, and really just doing a walkthrough on how to set that up. We try to make it as easy as possible, so it really doesn't take very long. Certainly, if you have any questions, do ask them as we go through. And then we'll additionally have some questions at the end, or some time for questions at the end, if you have anything that you want to ask us. And by way of introductions, I should say I'm John Kelvey. I'm the CEO of Bespoken. Also on this webinar from Bespoken, Bo Schrader, our head of marketing. Yvonne Perez, who leads our customer success, and Fiorella Casavilca, who manages our sales. What do we do at Bespoken? So we provide monitoring and testing tools for voice apps. We're a recognized vendor, both Amazon and Google. We're one of 3 people, I think, on their new testing page. We are also listed, I think, as an analytics/monitoring provider. We're also recognized by Google as a monitoring provider. We have over 900 apps that we're currently monitoring. We're getting close to 1,000. We have more than 2,500 developers. And we have a long history with speech recognition and AI, both the scaling and the testing of it. So I was building a speech recognition engine before this. Really had a chance to learn a lot about what's involved there. And one of the interesting things I would sort of say is that, where we've shifted now and we're not doing speech recognition, Alexa's and Google are nice enough to provide that. But even when we had our own speech recognition engine, we probably spent 90% of the time doing testing and 10% of the time actually building stuff for it. So even when you're actually building it, you're still spending an immense amount of time testing it, monitoring it, ensuring that the performance, the user experience is great. All those things really still apply. You're just taking out that 10% on building it. So we really try to take a lot of what we learned during that process and apply it here. And I just heard some of those little bubbles there, so just to check over here. All right. So no questions there. So what is testing and monitoring for voice apps? This slide, this comes from an infographic that we did. Some general stats that I think are very interesting about Alexa skills and voice devices. And one thing that I would really highlight here is the cost of bugs. If you catch a bug in the design time, it's 1/100th of the cost if you get it during production. And that's because once something is out in production, it's harder to diagnose, it's harder to fix, there's deployments, there's support people involved, there's tickets. Whereas if you get something when you're actually developing it, you don't have to go through all that stuff. And it doesn't involve all those people and processes and other things that take time and money. So you're really much better off getting things early. And that's one of the most important reasons to focus on testing and monitoring. We'll come back to that point in a little bit. But when we think about what testing and monitoring is, we created this layer cake to describe it. And the first layer is manual testing, which I think people know what that is. That's just testing with devices or simulators. Automated unit testing, which is something that a developer is typically doing with their code. End-to-end testing, which is You could also call this regression testing or just QA. And then lastly, continuous testing, which is what we're focused on today. And that's, like I said, we also just refer to that as monitoring. The reason why we say continuous testing is it's just to emphasize that you're really doing the same sorts of things. It's just you then doing them on this continuous basis after your application has gone live. So to go into a little more detail about what each of these steps is, the manual testing, you can do this with the EchoSim. You can do this obviously with the device itself. You can do it with things like the EchoSim. You can do it with the Reverb app. Those are great tools. I think probably everyone is using some or all of those today. Additionally, we would just mention we have some command line tools that are very helpful for doing manual testing, and you don't have to use your voice with those. Additionally, the Alexa Test Console is an excellent place for doing testing. So all those are great manual testing tools, but that should not be the only testing that's being done. That's really just a starting point. Just as important, we think, is automated unit testing. This is what, again, is typically being done by your developers. It's going to help you quickly identify bugs as well as build confidence in your code. It's about testing without dependencies. So you're really focusing on the code itself. You're not going to have a lot of complex steps around setting up infrastructure, setting up your skills, setting up a Lambda, doing those sorts of things. You don't want to have to do that during unit testing because the intention is that you can run your tests very quickly on a laptop during your development cycle, ideally as you're changing lines of code. So reducing those dependencies and focusing on making sure your logic is correct is the goal. And one of the great things you get with unit testing is that you can tie it into code coverage tools. I have a picture over here of codecov.io. That's one of our favorites. It's going to, besides showing you really in-depth and easily readable information about how well your tests are testing your code, they're also going to show you what your performance is like over time. So you can see, are things improving? Are they getting worse? Are certain areas getting worse or having particular problems? You just get all this great insight very, very easily. Something that's a very nice added benefit to doing your unit testing. And that actually brings us to sort of a theme for this presentation, which is that testing is a superpower. And I put this picture of Iron Man here. I specifically chose Iron Man because Tony Stark, also known as Robert Downey Jr., is not actually someone who has some innate superhuman ability like Spider-Man or Wolverine or something like that. He has a lot of money. Maybe that's sort of like a superpower, but what he did is he actually built this incredible machine. And that machine works with him to make him into a superhero. And that's what we think testing can do for you. And that's the way this is sort of our call to action for why you want to think about doing things like unit testing and automated end-to-end testing. It's going to enable you to have much faster times for troubleshooting problems. You can automate a sequence of steps and jump to the step that's a particular problem instead of going through a series of manual invocations with your voice. You have much faster build test cycles. You're not going to be deploying things out to Alexa and Lambda, processes that are slow and error prone. You have the ability, and this is a more subtle point, to put together some well-tested components to create something that's greater than its pieces. This is really a lot about what object-oriented programming is, but the ability to take components, to test them effectively, to guarantee their behavior, and then combine them together allows you to do things that are actually more complex than if you just wrote it out as a single component or as a single algorithm. That's an amazing thing about software development, and testing is integral to actually making that work together. So it's kind of like you're standing on the shoulder of giants where the giant is yourself. And that brings us to our last point, which is just people talk about 10x developers or 10x development, and it's not because you have people out there that are 10 times smarter or 10 times more knowledgeable. Instead, if you leverage tools effectively, you can do things in a 10 times more productive way and in a way that has more quality. So if you're not releasing bugs into production, you're saving all that time that you're not doing, working on weird prod support problems. If you're having much faster build test cycles, you save that time around doing deployments. So you can write more code, you can have that code tested faster, really just be far, far more productive. And so it really is like a superpower. And another aspect of that is end-to-end testing. This is sort of the opposite of unit testing, and then it is about testing all those pieces put together into a single whole. And you're testing things, you're testing Alexa, you're testing the AI, the NLU, the speech recognition in the NLU, you're testing your skill, the code, dependencies like Dynamo or S3. The intention is that, unlike the unit test, which is testing your code in isolation, here you're making sure everything works well together. It's a different focus, but it's just as important. And of particular importance is testing that speech recognition. This is another area where you can get a huge lift by using automation. Manually, if you wanted to try to test all the scenarios for a reasonably complex interaction model, you could spend all day talking to your device. And it's going to be error prone, inconsistent, and let's also face it, you're going to get pretty bored. Instead, if you created automated scripts to do the same thing, to test that interaction model, you can run through those same sets of tests several times a day, cover hundreds, if not thousands of scenarios, and do it all with basically the click of a button. That is immense time savings, and is another way that you can get 10x greater productivity. Hi guys, sorry about that. I just switched over to my hotspot. I think it's sort of our standard ritual for these at some point that I lose my network connection. I was about to jump into the demo here, but the part that I think I lost there was just, there are some special considerations for AI around the fact that it's changing, so you do want to be constantly testing it and making sure that your speech recognition NLU hasn't changed. The languages are very important. Consistent platform behavior is very important as well. And so these are all things you want to keep in mind when you're doing your testing. With that, I want to show you more about what we mean by that continuous testing. So actually, first let me log out here. So if you want to get started with us, first of all, you go to our website, apps.bespoken.io/dashboard, and you can log in with Amazon. That's our recommended way. You can also log in with email. But if you log in with Amazon, there's some nice, we actually can simplify the setup process for you. So I go here and I'm going to use our test account. And I go ahead and sign in. Now, if this is the first time, I reset this account to its starting state because the first time that you sign in, you need to get a validation token. And this sets up a virtual device. And the virtual device is what allows us to interact with Alexa programmatically. So it gives us access to a particular Alexa account. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I have a lot of test accounts for Amazon here. But so I'm going to use our Bespoken test account. We have this little US thing here. This is to indicate that it's configured for the US locale. So once I've done that, I have a virtual device set up. I can now work with that programmatically in a way that's very similar to if I had a physical device or similar to something like the Echo simulator. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a new skill that we're going to monitor. And so I'm going to call this test skill. And I'm going to say validate your new skill. Now when I get to the validation page here, I have two columns, input and expected. And we're going to set up a test for our skill called bring, which is a grocery list skill. And we put on the left-hand side what we want to say to it, and on the right-hand side what we expect it to say back. So I say open bring and welcome. And I'll say what is on my list. And I'll expect it to come back with Apple. Now, this is a partial match, meaning that what the expected response here, it doesn't need to be the complete response. It just needs to be part of the response that comes back. And this is a conversation, so it's going to do this as a sequenced interaction with Alexa. So I go ahead and I say run here. And I can just test this out and see that it works. And this is good. So it seems to be working. I can create a more in-depth response, to make a better test. But then once I have that set up, then I go ahead and I click enable monitoring. And at that point, it's going to run this test on a 30-minute basis. And so with that, I'll be running this entire interaction every 30 minutes, and that's going to really do a very good job of checking and making sure that my skill is working correctly. What it's actually doing underneath the covers is it's taking this input on the left-hand side, it turns it into audio, it sends it to Alexa, to AVS quite specifically. That in turn sends it to your skill. Your skill comes back with a response that's usually in an audio form. That audio is then turned back into text, and then we test it against that expected output. So there's a lot that's going on underneath the covers, but it's a very easy sort of test to write. And it's very easy to also enable monitoring here. Once I have this turned on, I'll have this stats tab becomes available. The source uptime is going to be there. That's going to show how the skill has been running over time. We don't have any data yet for it at this time because it hasn't actually run one of the tests. That'll be available within 30 minutes. But so now this is just off and running and checking on my skill on a regular basis. Now, if I have a problem, I'm going to get an email like this. So this is a good one. It says, well, monitoring your voice app, we detected a change in the results. And we'd sent open test player and expected back a certain response, but instead there was a problem with the requested skills response. And this is actually one that I saw this morning. I'm not even sure what's going on there. It seemed to then, I was checking into this and it seemed to resolve itself, so kind of mysterious. But this is going to indicate problems with speech recognition, problems with Alexa, problems with your code. It's a really simple, but at the same time, thorough sort of test that's going on. In addition to that, we have these really nice weekly validation reports. So this is another skill that I'm testing, which is called the new source. This one seems to be behaving very well because I have 100% accuracy on it. So that's really great there. I guess we're rounding up there to 100 because it's actually 99.9. But so you get these weekly reports and you can see how your skill is performing over time, which is really useful. So even if you don't have any errors, if you have very few errors, you can look at this and you have a good gauge about how your skills are doing. So very useful stuff there. A couple other things I would highlight. You can choose different locales. You can put this in different languages. So you can set up your test to work against those different areas. Now you do need to make sure that your device and your account is configured for that area. So if it's a skill that's, in the German locale, you need to make sure that you've actually enabled it within that locale within your account. That can be a little bit tricky, but we can actually show you how to do that. It's not too hard to set up. But then you're just writing the same sort of test against those skills. So you can test against all those different localities. It's a very useful thing. And the one other thing I'll just mention here, you have this call to action over here suggesting that you integrate. If you integrate with us, you get some great logging functionality, which we can cover in another session. But in addition to that, we can then monitor for any exceptions within your skill. And we can also monitor what the response times are like. So you can set thresholds for the number of errors in the last 30 minutes, what the average response time is going to be. And based on that, if you've integrated, which the integration, it really takes 5 or 10 minutes, then you'll get this additional layer of assurance that your skill is working correctly. So very, very easy to set up and do. Those are the key items that we wanted to go through with the monitoring. It really is meant to be very easy to set up and configure. Our kind of motto for this is, why not? If you spent the time to build the skill, why not use this to make sure that it's working correctly? And just a quick plug for the end-to-end piece that I mentioned earlier. If you do want to do that sort of deeper sort of QA, you can set up your test scripts. These are slightly more complicated, but it's this easy to edit syntax. You don't need to be a programmer. You can write these scripts, use your same virtual device that you just configured, and really run through a lot of different scenarios. So our sort of recommendation with it is that you do, a simple sort of test script on your 30-minute basis with the monitoring, and then you have end-to-end scripts that you're running during development or even every day or week that do a deeper regression test against all the intents and different utterances that you might have. So just to bring that together, we recommend using unit tests during development, test scripts during QA, the monitoring once the app is live, and then, like I mentioned, you can do additional automated runs on a daily or weekly basis to build additional confidence. Additionally, contact us about testing as a service. This is something that we're offering. So if you want someone to help you set up tests or to manage this on your behalf, we can do that. So questions. Here we have a great picture of a llama. Looks very smart. We like to think of that as us. We'll hopefully give you any smart answers to your questions. And also, I'm going to go and look at the panel there in a second, but just we have links to everything that I mentioned here and also the YouTube channel. We've done other webinars on the unit tests as well as the end-to-end test. So you can go and check those out and learn more about it there. And I don't see. How do you recommend doing end-to-end tests with randomized content? I see that question there. So if you're actually writing end-to-end tests using the scripts, you can supply multiple different values for the response. In terms of our continuous tests, we have a wildcard that you can use that you can put into for the monitoring. We are also going to sorry, I hope people can hear me. We're also going to enable that uploading of the YAML scripts on the monitoring screen there. Okay, good. Sorry, I'm talking and wondering if you can hear me at the same time. I hope that answers your question, Maxim. Well, so quite literally, let me show right here. If there's no obvious pattern. Okay, so if it's truly randomized responses, I mean, you just put a wildcard in, I guess. I mean, if there's no obvious pattern, I guess my question is, what is the goal for the test? If you just want to see that there's a response, we can ensure that, yes, it did come back with some response and not undefined or an empty string. I'm not sure that we can do a lot more than that. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean, I think if it's a truly randomized response, you're really going to want to focus on just ensuring that there was a response, and then if there's a next step in the process, ensuring that you can then do that next step. I guess, if you gave me a little more information about the use case, I could probably give you some more suggestions. It's 12:31. Happy to stay on a little bit longer if there's more questions. I'll keep this open for another minute. Thank you for those who responded to the poll. I see end-to-end testing is of real interest. That's of great interest to us as well. Yes, we do use ASR to recognize responses. That is correct. And it is imperfect. That's part of the reason why we have wildcards that you can put in there. It's imperfect, but it's generally consistent. And we've also done some nice things to improve the performance on it. I would say we have better than 95% accuracy at this point, which is not that we have, 95% is basically the standard for ASR accuracy anyway, but we've gotten better performance by taking advantage of expected responses. Yes, that's exactly right. Maxim says, hence you update the test once you see the first result. Yeah, so it is using the response to feed the ASR, and it gets better performance based on that. Yeah, that is cool. That's actually one of the main cheats, not cheats, but one of the best ways to improve speech recognition is by narrowing the grammar or giving hints to the grammar. That's one of the things I learned doing speech recognition engines. And that's what we're doing here. Now, I will say we're hard at work on putting together a Google version of this. We hope to have that out soon. In the case of Google, we do actually just get directly the text response back. So we don't have to do that ASR piece, at least most of the time. So you can have an audio response. And so in the case of an audio response, you still need to do, if you're using produced audio within your skill or voice app, which is actually something that we recommend to people from a usability perspective, not just using Alexa's voice, but using, audio talent. We think it creates a better experience, but it also means that you have to do the speech to text on that reply. There's no way around it. All right, well, like I said at the start of this presentation, we will make this webinar available as well as the slides for your reference. We really appreciate everybody joining us, appreciate the questions. Reach out to us if you have any questions at all about testing and monitoring. It's what we're here for. So thanks a lot.